Breaking news! Welcome to this deep dive. We are jumping straight into the details of a targeted attack that occurred in Washington, D.C.
Right, just before the Thanksgiving holiday.
Exactly. And this incident immediately created this huge fissure in the American political and legal landscape.
It really did. What we're analyzing here isn't just the physical event, the shooting itself near the White House, but the immediate aftermath.
Which is just chaotic.
Totally chaotic, a conflicting flow of information, especially about the victims. So our job today is really to synthesize all our sources, bring some clarity to what happened, and maybe more importantly, to understand the deeply charged political context.
The context is everything. I mean, why were these uniformed personnel targets in the first place? The core fact that just grabbed national attention was the targeting of 2 members of the National Guard, wounded in an ambush. And the location, 300 meters from the White House.
Less than 1,000 feet.
It's staggering. That proximity just elevated the whole situation from, a local tragedy to a national security flashpoint.
And that's why the initial reporting was so confused. When something happens right on the executive's doorstep, everyone from state governors to federal agencies, they all jump to report before the facts are actually verified.
Yeah, you get ahead of the story.
You do. And the first few hours of this incident are a perfect illustration of how vulnerable our information environment really is.
Okay, so let's start with establishing the facts on the ground. We know the shooting happened at 2:15 p.m. on Wednesday, November 26th.
Yeah.
Can you sort of paint a picture of where this all went down?
Certainly. We're talking about the intersection of 17th Street and I Street in the northwest quadrant of Washington, D.C.
Right.
If you know the city, this is a major hub. It's busy, tons of commuters, federal workers. It's right next to the Farragut West metro station.
So this is an area that's constantly under surveillance.
Constantly,
Yeah.
which makes the brazenness of the attack just astonishing, really.
And the nature of it was immediately clear to law enforcement, right?
It was. Deputy Police Chief Jeff Carroll, he was quick to label it an ambush. He said it was a lone gunman who brandished a firearm.
The word ambush is so critical there.
It implies preparation, intent. It distinguishes it from just, random street violence. And we also saw Mayor Muriel Bowser. She immediately echoed that, calling it a targeted attack.
When you have local leadership and the police using that kind of definitive language right away, it tells you something.
It tells you they believe the motive was specifically aimed at that uniform, not just random people on the street.
So, an ambush. How did it end? How was the situation resolved on the ground?
The sources confirmed the gunman was wounded pretty quickly by return fire from other military personnel at the scene.
Okay, so they were able to neutralize the threat.
They were. The Metropolitan police arrested the suspect, who was then taken to the hospital in critical condition. But what's crucial here is that while the immediate physical threat was contained, the identity, and most critically the why, the motive, remained completely unknown that evening.
We had the what and the where, but the why just got completely submerged in political speculation.
Exactly. And that's where the chaos, the real information chaos, began.
Yeah, the public got hit with this just devastating cycle of misinformation in those first few hours.
Yeah.
Right on the eve of a major holiday.
And what's fascinating, if you look at the sources, is where that first critical error came from. It wasn't just some rumor. It was an official source.
Who was it?
Patrick Morrisey, the Republican governor of West Virginia.
The home state of the 2 victims.
The home state. He announced via social media that the 2 military personnel had died.
Oh, wow. That's the kind of statement that triggers flags at the highest levels of government. It sends shockwaves through the families, the entire state.
Precisely. And almost instantly, you could see the information structure start to break down. Governor Morrisey had to issue this frantic retraction on X.
He walked it back.
He had to. He cited what he called contradictory information about their condition and promised updates only when the facts were more complete. It's just a perfect case study in how state-level urgency can override federal verification in, the age of instant communication.
You can almost feel the panic in that digital retraction.
Whoa.
So what was the confirmed official status once the federal agencies managed to get control of the information flow?
Well, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem was one of the first to confirm the shooting, trying to stabilize the narrative. Then FBI Director Kash Patel, he confirmed to the press that the 2 military personnel were in a critical state.
Okay, so not deceased, but critical.
Critical, and this was later confirmed by President Trump himself, who described them as grievously injured. So thankfully, the news of their deaths was wrong, but their condition was still extremely serious.
And we should just pause to, humanize this for a second. ABC confirmed the victims were a man and a woman. They weren't just statistics in this political firestorm.
Absolutely not. And FBI Director Patel made a very deliberate point of calling both of them heroes.
That kind of language, it immediately elevates it.
It does. It moves it beyond standard violence and frames it as an attack on the very idea of protection provided by the military. And that shifts the discussion firmly into the political realm.
Which brings us to the core of this deep dive. The incident itself is tragic, but it's just impossible to understand the scale of the response without understanding why those troops were even there at 17th and I Street in the first place.
And that moves us squarely into the legal and political quicksand of their deployment. That's where the real intellectual friction is.
So set the scene for us. Why were they there?
These National Guard members were deployed to D.C. as part of a mission that President Trump ordered way back in August. This wasn't a temporary thing. By mid-November, the scale of the deployment was, it was massive.
How massive?
2,175 military personnel in the capital.
That is a significant military footprint in a civilian city. What was the stated purpose? What were the objectives from the federal executive?
The official reasons were twofold. First, they were there to actively fight criminality and what was perceived as civil unrest in the capital.
Okay.
Second, they were directed to support federal immigration police IC in operations within the district. So essentially, they were performing federal law enforcement duties inside a local jurisdiction.
But D.C. has such a unique status. It's not a state. It's constantly at odds with the federal government over home rule.
Precisely, and that's why this deployment was so immensely controversial. The D.C. municipality, the local Democrat authorities, they argued vehemently that the federal executive was just grossly overstepping its powers.
They saw it as an imposition.
A total imposition. They viewed it as the executive branch imposing military force on a local jurisdiction against the will of its elected officials. For them, it wasn't about fighting crime. It was about asserting federal dominance.
So we have this political battleground, but then it became a legal one. And that is absolutely essential to understanding the context of the attack. What was the exact legal status of those troops on November 26th?
This is maybe the most fascinating piece of the whole puzzle. Just 6 days before the attack on November 20th, a federal judge had issued a major ruling against the administration.
What did the ruling say?
It declared the deployment of the National Guard for these law enforcement operations in the capital to be illegal.
Illegal.
The court found that the executive had exceeded its authority in using the Guard for those specific policing functions.
So they were on patrol on November 26th under a legal cloud. They were performing a duty that a federal judge had just explicitly said was unlawful. How were they still on the streets?
Well, this is where the legal mechanism of the injunction comes in. While the judge ruled the deployment illegal, the Trump administration was immediately granted a temporary stay, a 21-day injunction.
Which gave them time to appeal.
Exactly. It meant they didn't have to immediately withdraw the troops, but the underlying legality of their presence was already fundamentally undermined. They were serving under a legal ticking clock.
That context just makes President Trump's immediate and decisive reaction to the attack so much more pointed. He was dealing with an incident involving troops whose very presence had just been legally challenged.
Absolutely. The president was at Mar-a-Lago for Thanksgiving when the news broke, and he went straight to Truth Social. His language was, it was designed to frame the incident not just as a crime, but as an attack on his authority and his policy.
What did he say?
He called the shooter, whose motives were still totally unknown, an animal, and he promised the attacker would pay a very heavy price.
That kind of strong language does two things at once, doesn't it? It condemns the violence, but it also reinforces the image of the Guard as protectors.
It justifies their controversial presence. Precisely. And this is where the whole thing moves from being a reaction to being an immediate escalation of that political and legal fight.
So instead of the court ruling being a reason to maybe review the deployment?
The attack was used as a justification to immediately double down on the contested policy.
So what was the concrete action taken by the executive branch after the ambush?
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth quickly declared that President Trump had ordered the mobilization of 500 additional National Guard military personnel.
500 more.
500 more. Think about the messaging there. A federal judge says your current deployment is illegal, and when that very deployment comes under attack, your immediate, highly visible response is to increase the troop count by nearly a quarter.
So the consequence of the attack wasn't de-escalation or reconsideration, but a significant, tangible increase in the very deployment that was under legal fire.
It creates a powerful constitutional dilemma.
Yeah.
It connects all the threads perfectly. The administration used this tragic incident, an ambush on two of its service members, to justify overriding the opposition from the D.C. government, and critically, to publicly signal defiance of the judicial branch's ruling. It's a classic example of an executive using a security crisis to push the boundaries of its perceived power.
All right, let's synthesize everything we've learned for you. This deep dive, it started with the shock and the tragic confusion around a targeted ambush near the White House.
Right, resulting in grievous injuries to two National Guard members and those immediate contradictory reports about whether they had survived.
We established that this tragic event, it happened against this incredibly high-tension backdrop. The deployment of over 2,000 troops was already highly contested by D.C. authorities.
And just days before the ambush had been explicitly ruled illegal by a federal judge, even if that ruling was temporarily stayed by an injunction.
The ultimate response from the commander-in-chief was swift, it was strongly worded, and it was immediately centered on escalation. The order was to mobilize 500 more troops.
Using the attack itself as the primary justification to expand a legally challenged mission. The key takeaway here is really the acceleration of a power struggle. In a highly politicized environment, this security incident became the vehicle for the executive branch to aggressively assert its authority over both the judiciary and the local D.C. government, all at once.
So, what does this all mean for the legal and constitutional limits of executive power? Here is a final thought for you to consider. Given the deployment was already deemed illegal by a federal judge just days prior, what are the lasting constitutional implications when the executive branch uses a security incident, an ambush, as the immediate and publicly stated justification to mobilize hundreds of more federal troops, essentially using violence against its own personnel as a means to circumvent a ruling by the judicial branch? That specific chain of events, it fundamentally challenges the separation of powers and sets a very powerful precedent for how security crises can redefine legal boundaries.